Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
Morning.
Morning, everybody.
Welcome.
What's up? We're enthusiastic
Right,
today.
welcome
honestly.
to One Decent Pastor.
Yeah.
We already said that in the intro. That's why I'm not trying to say that again.
Right.
Welcome.
Except for on YouTube. Very confusing.
Yeah.
Welcome back, Chad.
Yeah, glad to be back on vacation for a week and had a good balance of some adventure and a lot of relaxing. And
¿Cómo está?
muy bien, ¿y tú?
Bien.
Yeah, sí, señor.
How do you say zip line in Spanish?
I don't know. I never learned zip line in Spanish, so
Did you go on a zip
you
line?
just say "Donde está zip line."
Dude, he actually went on a zip.
Jill got you to do
yeah.
something.
She talked. We did a couple adventurous things, and she talked me into the zip line thing through the jungle, which like zip lining is not like I've done it once. I don't need to do it again, but everything's an adventure in like you don't just show up somewhere and zip line. Like you get on a boat and you ride across the Gulf in this jet boat, which is an experience in and of itself, and then you come to this secluded beach, which is like just stinking paradise. And then you walk through the jungle. You take a car ride up the hill, and then you get to the jungle, and then you walk through the jungle, and you're zip lining like 700, 800 feet over the jungle canopy.
Hang glide over a volcano.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
And we climbed 44 flights of stairs.
You counted them.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, my phone tells me how many stairs you climb at the end, steps you climb at the end of the day.
That's crazy.
And so you climb up some stairs, and then you zip line, and then you climb up some stairs, and you zip line again, and you climb up more stairs, and zip line again. 44 flights of stairs later, which they don't tell you that in the brochure that you're going to be climbing 44 flights of stairs.
So it was relaxing, restful. That's what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It actually was. Glad to be back though. Missed everybody.
How was that place? Did it exceed your expectations or what?
Um,
Tropical paradise?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, the resort area of Puerto Vallarta, or Nuevo Vallarta is where we stayed. There is not a blade of grass that's out of place. I mean, Mexican landscapers, muy bueno. These guys know what they're doing.
They do.
Yeah, it's just palm trees and
Yeah.
I mean it's just super nice.
What were the temperatures?
85 degrees.
You know what they were here?
Not too hot. Yeah, I was watching the weather here. Yeah,
It's been a weird April.
yeah, it has been a weird
I
April.
mean, we need it, but whatever.
Yeah,
Well, cool, man. That sounds
so yeah,
awesome.
I'm glad to be back.
The pictures of the sunsets were muy bueno.
Yeah,
Yeah, we missed you. We got through Good Friday and Easter, and we made it to the next week, and we're here to tell about it.
Yeah. Last week was a little brutal without you,
yeah.
but we were glad you got to get away. and do
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah, it was
we got
good.
through it fine. So it worked out. What else? We got the men's dealio.
Yeah, third
Tonight.
Thursday is
Thursday
tonight.
night.
What's for dinner?
It's a taco bar. I think it's supposed to be a taco bar.
Tacos,
Kind of a Cinco
tacos
de
for a
Mayo.
week, man.
Taco bar.
That's right. I can always eat more tacos.
That's what I understand, yes.
Okay.
And I believe Paul Clark will be sharing his
Yeah.
testimony.
Yeah,
So
sure.
All right.
we'll get to hear from him.
Right
Yeah,
on.
6
Sounds
o'clock tonight.
What you drinking there, fella?
Cold brew coffee,
Where do you go to get that?
Starbucks.
Right here, the one right here in
Yeah.
Cyber?
Yeah.
What do you got over there, Brent?
I got nothing.
Get your bottle
There
of
you
water.
go. I was wondering where your water was.
You got your hot coffee.
I boycotted Starbucks. I can't. I'm a Christian, so I can't.
Disney,
I'm
Starbucks,
just
like
kidding.
forget all that. Target.
It's a slippery slope. Yeah,
This is actually what we're going to talk about today.
I
Is
was,
all
I was,
the,
I was
all
trying
the,
to give you kind of an assist so that you could.
yeah.
so I could dunk it.
Yeah.
I'm too short. I'm a white man.
That was a good
amongst,
thought, though.
amongst other things. So yeah. We're going to talk about which corporations you should not support today. No, we're not. Support them all.
That's why I have my Starbucks cup hidden behind my bottle of water from view of the camera. Just
Yeah.
for that very
Yeah.
reason.
Well, even the
Calm it
Kirkland. I wonder how many baddies are working for that company.
Actually, I boycotted Costco after they got rid of the Polish sausage.
Yeah,
That
that's
was just the
that-
worst move in
that was
corporate
evil.
history.
well, that's the unforgivable sin, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
unpardonable sin
Yeah.
is they got rid of the Polish stuff. My brother's a warehouse manager, so I still bother him about that, and he insists that they got rid of them because they were such poor sellers.
Nah, your brother's wrong.
He still, and he knows these things, and it's like, dude, you're like part of a conspiracy or something, because everybody in my circles raved about the Polish dog. They went there to
Yeah.
get the Polish dog, and he's like, no, the stats didn't bear that out.
I don't know.
And now they got
Yeah.
they got rid of the choppy onions. And that's gonna do it, dude. That's gonna be the
Just going to
fine.
kill the whole thing.
That's the nail in the coffin. If you can't even go
Right.
and get like the regular hot dog and then put the little chopped up onions on it,
Right.
we're done.
Sauer-
Our relationship's
Sauerkraut
over.
still a thing?
I don't eat their. No, it was the relish, right?
That's
No, they had
Oh, I
sauerkraut
didn't know
too.
that. I don't.
I don't like sauerkraut,
so-
but sauerkraut on a Costco Polish dog. Oh man,
Okay, I'm getting hungry.
yeah.
Okay, let's jump back. So now I'm like stealing questions from Ask Pastor John because they're so good. So it's like we're just gonna steal some of
So
those.
at least we're giving credit where credit's due.
Oh yeah, dude. Like yeah.
There was a pastor who had a program where he was saying, "Hey, send in your questions," and people sent questions in.
People actually sent questions in,
all
and then
right.
he got
Wow.
to answer them. But since no one sends questions into us, we're creating our own.
Maybe it's
We're
because
borrowing it.
maybe it's because we're not.
Maybe it's
Pastor
because
John.
no one cares.
That could be.
Maybe it's because no one cares.
Yeah, maybe it's not the questions; it's people don't care about the answers.
Yeah.
Where they come
We
from.
want to know the answers, just not from you guys.
Right.
We'll ask Pastor John.
Well,
That's-
I'm
yeah.
giving you a good reference now. You can go watch his show and get everything that you've been lacking. So
there are good questions on there.
there's some really good
Yeah.
questions.
and it's the
on
same things our people would want answers to, I believe, or should hear the answers
for
to.
sure. The first one is not from there. The first one is one that I came up with, and it's because like I'm like working on this. I think for a nuts and bolts sermon because I think it's like time.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to think about. I don't know about you guys, but I've heard of more Christians like in the last year, 2 years, 3 years, moving to places for reasons other than I've ever really heard about before. And so I like it's worth kind of looking at and talking about. So I guess we should start with like, well, the question is like, where then shall a Christian live? Like, where shall we live? Are we free to live anywhere? Which is obviously like, yes. But biblically, like, do we have like any direction or any information in the Bible that kind of should play into where we decide to live? So the first question is when people like decide where to live, what are often the reasons that they help them decide that?
Well, lately it's politics.
Yes. So let's not go there yet.
Okay, I'm jumping the gun.
So like when anyone like what are some of the other things? I mean that's obviously
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? Never mind. That's
I don't know.
legit.
We could go affordability. We could go climate. I mean, we could go
Okay.
all kinds of things.
School district.
School
If you have
districts,
kids, like
yeah.
you're looking at. I remember there's a ton of people and sisters when I was doing chimneys out there. I had a lot of customers out there. Almost all of the ones that were families. That was the reason why they moved to Sisters was because it was like some of the best schools, I guess.
Yeah,
So-
work opportunities. People.
Obviously,
Move
yeah,
for that.
yeah, work, business.
I think there's also
Yeah.
there's the old pull a geographical kind of a mindset that
Yeah,
things
those
aren't
too.
working out well for me here, so going to go and start something new, try life out over here and see if it gets better.
Yeah.
I've seen people
For
do
sure.
that over the years.
For sure. And none of there's really nothing, well, that one's kind of weird, but the other ones we talked about, there's nothing really wrong with those in and of
Right.
themselves. I mean, we have the freedom to kind of, look at those things and go, okay, these are good places for us to go based on, what these, this provides us. So, should a Christian think the same way? Obviously they can, or is there anything that should be added to maybe that list of why we should live where we live? This could go actually two ways.
I don't think I have ever known very many people that would consider, where they live based on, a church, for example.
Mhm.
If they find a good, Bible teaching, gospel-centered church, that doesn't factor into people's, like they'll move somewhere and maybe hope that they find a good church.
Sure.
Right. rather
Assume
than-
that they can.
Right. Assume,
Yeah, I
assume
think
that they can.
there's
so
an
that doesn't-
assumption that there's 20 churches and one of them's going to be good, so that's not a real concern.
Right.
We'll find one.
Right.
I think most people think that.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think that should be, more of an important factor than it probably usually is for most people.
I must confess, like when we moved down here from Deschutes Riverwoods, from Bend, like it was just completely fleshly. We weren't thinking spiritually at all. So we had a church we were going to there in Bend, and our thing was just that the place we were living had gotten too crowded. Bend had gotten too crowded, and then we started looking down here, and we were like, oh, there's less people. There's bike paths in the resort that we can use. We can use all the resort's amenities. There's a river at the end of of the road that, you know, the house is on, where we can, you know, go fishing with the kid. Like, all of it was like American dream type stuff, and none of it had anything to do. And we were, you know, pretty serious Christians at the time, but none of it had to do with like where we're going to fellowship, what's that going to do as far as our connections to the church and to people in the church and relationships. And like, we didn't even think of that. It was all about us like living a better life now. And so, like,
I think that's pretty common. You know, we've known people. It's been kind of weird even at times where I can think of one family in particular that just told us this church has changed our life. It's changed our family. They were growing. They were, you know, things were revolutionizing. The husband was becoming the spiritual leader of the home. And it was really cool. And then a job opportunity came up for them to make more money in a different state. And no conversation, no nothing. Just we're you know, hey, we're out. And I just remember thinking, I don't know, what are you giving up in order to, and what are you getting, and where's this offer even coming from? It was kind of an odd, I don't know, I'm not saying it was the devil tempting them or something like that, but it just seemed very strange at a time when you're growing and spiritually things are revolutionizing in your family. Right. And then, hey, money, let's go. See, bye.
Exactly.
It was weird.
Right.
Yeah, because we do seem to prioritize like the reasons why we move. You mentioned one right now, which is, I think, bigger than ever. I think it's always kind of been there.
Right.
But
it's at the forefront. Though,
it's at the forefront now, which is people that think like us, especially politically.
Right.
And so we've got, obviously, we live in a red state, blue state, you know, country, and so we identify, you know, what's what, and just the kind of laws and legislature and just society that goes on in those different colored states, and then we say that's priority. Right, just like money might be priority to move somewhere, that's become priority now to move. The problem is that this has, at least I think it's broad, is that this has crept into the church's thinking as well. And I think this is really why I want to talk about this today, is because it may seem like it's something we have freedom in, which we do, and that it's not that big of a deal to make that decision and to want to live somewhere where people are like-minded and they hold the same values and the same morals as us. But is there maybe something that's missing from how the Christian should be thinking?
I think of a pastor friend of mine, more of an acquaintance, so I would say that we're real close, but you know, decided to move to the Midwest several months back because it's easier to pastor in the Midwest than it is in the Pacific Northwest. Like, he just kind of got fed up with the political landscape of things, and you know, just kind of felt like he was beating his head against a wall with trying to pastor people. So it's like, we're going to go somewhere else where it's easier to pastor. And when I heard about that, I immediately thought of, there's a missionary I know, a guy named Kelly. He and his wife, in their retirement years, decided that they were going to go on the mission field, and they asked the question, like, well, where's the dark spot on the map? Like, where's one of the least reached places in the world? It happened to be Cambodia. And he's like, okay, well, where's the least reached place in Cambodia? And just kind of, like, he was asking those kinds of, like, where's the hardest place, and where's the hardest place and the hardest place? That's where we're going to go. And he went there, right, to go to a hard place because he was missionally minded. And that's how they've chosen to spend their retirement years, you know, just working hard, you know, for the Lord and for the gospel. And I think that a lot of times we just have a backwards mentality in that.
Yeah. Because, again, it doesn't seem wrong in and of itself that we're going, okay, where can I, you know, where can my cost of living be better? Where are their school districts good? Where are people, you know, like-minded? But at the same time, even though that's not, like, in and of itself a bad thing, it's still a fleshly thing when a Christian has this whole component of commission, of marching orders that are spiritual and eternal. And so one of the things I, like, the more I read my Bible, the more that I see that, like, Christians don't run from a fire, like, they run into one. Right? and I know we don't like that, and I know we find ways to justify reversing that, but, like, that's the bottom line of what I see with the church and with people that are intentional on mission, is that we don't run from fires, we run into them. And the number one thing I've seen with Christians over the last few years, moving to different states, literally picking up everything they have and uprooting themselves and uprooting their families, is to go and run from a fire. Right. Things are bad here. Society's bad here. The homeless are bad here. The progressive, ideas of the day are bad here. We got to get out of here, and they're running from the fire. And to me, it's just looking so backwards, and it's becoming like, I don't know, more of a pandemic to me than anything else, is seeing Christians think this way. And so that's kind of where I'm coming at it. There was a guy like a couple years ago, we were eating after a Sunday service one day down in La Pine. And it's when we used to eat afterward. We used to be able to do that.
The good
And
old days.
I kind of strolled over there late and got my food and just found a table and sat down. And they were in the middle of this table of people were in the middle of a discussion about how horribly liberal and all that stuff that Oregon's become in the areas. And so he was talking about moving to Idaho, which is, of course, the Republican promised land, right? That's where everyone's going right now, or at least one of them. And I remember him saying right as I was sitting down, I'm like, it's a matter of time before I move my family over there and get away from these idiots. As a Christian, right? And I'm thinking of all kinds of things are going through my head right now as far as responding to this dude and the comment that just came out of his mouth and how horrible it was. But all I could really get out was like, if you move to Idaho, like, who's going to share Jesus with these idiots? Like, that was the only thing, like, and the whole table, of course, like, kind of went silent because it was this whole other side that nobody was talking about. You know what I mean? And so that's really why I think this matters. I think it should actually probably be something that the church focuses on with their people a little more, is how we're actually thinking. Do we really care about the lost? Do we understand that when we're seeking the lost and on mission intentionally for the lost, that it does mean that we're going to be swimming upstream? Yeah.
Well, I was going to say there's also something that's extremely false in this idea of, like Idaho. Once we get to Idaho, then things are going to be the way they're supposed to be.
Right.
And it's like, I lived in Idaho most of my life. Maybe not anymore, but for a while.
Yeah.
It's full of sinners. It's full of people that maybe sin differently than the people that are irritating you here in Oregon.
Yes.
But it's full of sinners, people that need Jesus.
Isn't that probably the difference, though? Is that there's sinners that at least think like you, like they sin the way you do.
Right. And there's this assumption that I'm going to get there and this is all going to be better. But it's kind of like when somebody sends their kid to a Christian school to keep them away from the baddies.
Yes,
and
that's a
it's
great
like,
example.
But they're Christian schools are full of sinful kids
Yep.
that are going to corrupt your kid, or that your kid's going to corrupt. I mean, that's just the way it works.
Yep.
And so at some point you have to recognize we are living in a broken world, in a fallen world with sinful people, and we've been called here to be salt and light in the midst of that. And
Yep.
so, doesn't mean there's not opportunities in Idaho, but going there with the idea that, Florida or wherever, all these different places
Texas.
people are going right now. Texas is another one.
Lots of California
That I'm going
going
to get
to Texas
there
right now.
and we're going to finally be able to just like kick our feet up and say, we've arrived at the promised land.
Right.
No,
Right.
and it's almost like you're trying to get to the promised land early.
Right.
In some way, it's kind of a weird idea.
Agreed.
Like once we get here, we don't have to worry about this stuff. Our kids will be fine. Our finances will be fine. It's a really weird way to think.
It is a
and I
weird
get
way
the
to
desire. My flesh wants that.
Yes.
I want that too. But
Yes.
but it's like that's not at all what Jesus has described. You're going to be outcasts here. You're not going to fit in, and you have a job to do while you're here. And it's not about you. It's about the kingdom.
Yep.
Exactly. Yeah, it's
Weird.
funny about youth groups
Yeah.
because I saw that with my kids when they started going to like youth groups and being around other groups of Christians kids
Yeah.
is when they started learning a ton of things that I was trying to keep them from learning.
Right.
And then as a youth pastor later on, I saw that same thing where it's like this is not like this is not a refuge for innocence.
Yeah.
There's just as much mud in the water here as anywhere else, and so we need to realize, I think, and this is a whole other subject.
Well,
that-
at the same time, I want to say we homeschooled our kids for a time, and,
Yes.
and I don't regret that.
Yeah.
There's probably a time when they do need to be integrated into public schools, or at the time we realized, okay, we prepared them, we've given them this foundation to them, and I felt right about that.
Sure.
But then there came a point where it's like, okay, we're almost maybe. Every parent has to figure that out. I don't regret homeschooling, and I don't
Yeah,
think
we
my
don't
mindset
either.
was wrong about that. But I think that there's a mentality, as adults, where we start to. We're just wrong about the way we're thinking about it, because it's not the promised land,
right.
and it isn't going to solve all your problems. You're just going to find different
Right.
different problems, different sin.
Right. So obviously part of the lie is that it won't necessarily solve your problems. The other part of it too is that that's not necessarily how, and you mentioned this too, how we're supposed to be thinking, or what how God has called us to live. And so just like a very general flyover the Bible, like we get the first commission that was ever given to Adam and Eve was to multiply and fill the earth, right? To be fruitful, to spread out, to move out, and to fill the earth. And then, of course, we have Babel, not much, not too far after that, where they're like, no, we're all digging each other, and we're just going to stay here. We're just going to put roots down here. And so they kind of like go against that commission, and of course God scatters them in other ways, right? And then you even get to the early church where you have like Pentecost, and you have this huge movement that happens in a concentrated, localized area of Jerusalem. And it would have been easy to say, like, this is awesome. I mean, it like we're going to stick together, and because that's what we do. We stick to our own kind. And so what does God do? He brings in the Romans and basically like forces these people out by force to fill the earth and multiply. And so like just with the basics of what we see in the Bible and what God wants and what our tendency is, we should know that that we should be aware of our desire to go against where God would have us go.
Right.
So
At the end of the day, it comes down to, for many people, either your mindset is a consumeristic mindset that says, you know, what's in this for me and what's best for me, or you have a more missional mindset to say, how can I contribute to the mission of God?
Yes.
You know, for the Christian and the church and the world.
yes,
And I don't think a lot of people are thinking about that when it comes time to deciding where to live or if they should move or not. It's all purely, you know, consumeristic. Things that aren't necessarily bad. Like, I don't mean that necessarily
Right.
in a negative connotation. I mean, it's good to have a stable job,
Sure.
you know, where you can make a wage that supports your family. It's good to be able to live somewhere, you know, where you can afford to buy a house and where your kids can have a good education. Like, those are good things.
sure.
But also in the midst of those things, like, you know, God has called us to be on a mission, and I think that's the piece that's missing from a lot of people's mindsets in this kind of question.
Agreed. Totally agree. I love the picture of the Samaritan woman, Jesus at the well, right? And I think even just looking at that tells us a lot of how he desires us to be and how we should be, how we should desire to be as sojourners and aliens here. Is, you know, he went to a lady he wasn't supposed to go to in a place that he wasn't supposed to go to give her something that she didn't deserve. And I think that every Christian should seek to have that Samaritan well, or Samaritan wells plural, in their life.
Sure.
If your goal is to get somewhere to where there are no Samaritan wells that you have to access, then, you know, because everything's agreeable, then like you've taken a wrong turn
Right.
in your Bible reading, in your, you know, your theology. God works through that stuff. He moves us around. He works in spite of us. So
Yeah.
so it's not, this is not some fundamental legalistic type of thing. It's just a call maybe for us to think a little different than a lot of people are thinking right now. There's a lot of Christians thinking, there's my people over there that think like me, live like me. That's what I want myself and my family to be around, so we're all going to go over here. And when you start putting a bunch of elbows together and a bunch of hands together and a bunch of legs together, then you don't have a full body, you know. So anyway, any final words on that?
I was thinking of this, you know, the story in the Old Testament that basically God says, you know, it says that He gave them what they asked, but He sent leanness to their souls. And I think sometimes we can think we're going to have something better if we can just get over to this place.
Right.
And maybe God will allow us to do that.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, we want to be in the center of His will, doing what He's asked us to do. And if we're not there, we're not going to be at peace. We're not going to be,
Right.
you know, we're not going to be fulfilled.
Right.
And so, yeah, you know, even if He's got us in a weird place at a weird time with weird people, but that's where He wants us, that's where we're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And so trust in that. And, you know, because again, you might get what you want, but
Yep.
at what cost?
So case in point, we moved down here. We're here for a few years. We're kind of living the dream in Sun River like we
Yeah.
thought, and we're using the river, and we got a little boat, and we go out on the river, and we're just like, oh, this is amazing. I can't believe we get to live in this place and do what we do. And it didn't take long, but a few years before God crashed the party and kind of brought me back to, you know, purpose, which was He brought us to a church that we weren't expecting to go to down here for some necessary time. And then we planted a church because it turns out there's a dark spot in the neighborhood He moved us to. And so, like, yeah, He works in spite of us, and He does His thing. You know, He's sovereign. If He wants to stop us from moving somewhere, He can. But a lot of times He'll give us the desires of our fleshly heart, and then He'll actually make something different out of it than we ever intended to. So
Well, and I think we're going to kind of move into this topic, but you know, when we moved here from Idaho, I didn't want to come here. I told my wife I will never move to Oregon, and like 10 months later, here I was.
well, you have a disobedient wife that prayed behind your back.
She was prepared. Yeah, she was. She wanted to be with family and stuff, and I didn't want to come to Oregon at all. I loved Idaho. I loved being close to my family, the church. I don't like change.
What was
I
the
don't
promised
like-
land?
You know, it was the promised land in Oregon. No, Oregon wasn't. I mean, it was
Left
wasn't
of the
even that
dial
big.
over here?
It had nothing to do with politics.
I
I
know.
think it was just my own self-comfort. And, but I remember just committing it to the Lord and saying, Lord, if this is what you want, I'm willing to go. And literally, once I yielded to His will and started, you know, the doors began to open. We were living here, and I look at what He's done. I mean, seriously, we moved right next door to you and Carrie. Started attending Bible studies on Friday. I mean, I wouldn't be a pastor probably right now if I wouldn't have done this.
Right.
And so, you know, if I would have gotten Brent's will and what I wanted, my life would be very different right now, and I would have missed out on so much. And so I'm glad that I was willing to obey, even when I didn't, you know, did something I didn't want to do, which is kind of the opposite of what we're talking about. But I moved somewhere I didn't want to go,
Right.
and God blessed it, because I remember even the first night in our new home, I remember sitting there on the floor. Our furniture was still in boxes, you know, everything was all in disarray. And I sat down and I looked at Joy and I said, I feel more at home right now than I did at our last house the whole time we were there. I was where God wanted me to be.
Yep.
And that's a great place
That's
to
a
be.
great place to be.
And that's home.
So this is
Yeah.
a perfect segue into the next question, which actually kind of goes both ways, but you're leading into it well. How does God lead us in daily decisions? So this is obviously a great example of maybe something that's a little bigger than a daily decision. I think there are people that walk through their life, Christians, hyper conscious to like micro decisions.
Sure.
Like which shoe should I put on first, type of deal, or where should I eat lunch today? Because they're so hypersensitive to God and everything, which is good. We should be totally conscious to God and everything. But where do you find that line there in what we should be looking for and how we look for it in daily decisions?
I think it goes back to, you know, just this idea of a missional mind. You know, does it matter which shoe you put on first or what color of shirt you wear? In the grand scheme of things, maybe not. Does it matter, you know, where you eat lunch, or even in some bigger decisions about, you know, should I take this job or should I
Right.
take that job?
Should I move here? Or should
You know,
I take that job? Yep.
You know, at the end of the day, like, you know, can you serve God and can you engage in the mission of God in this job or that job, or can more so in this one over that one or whatever? You know, I think we've just got to let just that you know, the idea that God has given us a mission and a purpose that's going to permeate our mindset when it comes to making these daily decisions that maybe are smaller in scale as to, you know, moving to this state or that state.
Sure. So we have an amount of freedom, obviously, in the way that we live, but none of that freedom disconnected from the reality of a sovereign God who has a purpose
Right.
for us.
That's
And
a
so-
good way to put it. Thanks for putting it in a better way.
So it's kind of both, right? Which I think is the challenge. Is
Yeah.
that it's hard for us to go, okay, well, God's got definite plans and definite purposes, and He's determinate, you know, on so many levels, even micro levels, and so I don't want to miss that. I want to make sure that I'm always in His will, and because He's so big and powerful, we don't have to look at Him that way.
Right.
We have like room, you know, we're free to move around the cockpit, you know, type of deal. So, what do you think, Brent?
I just think so much of it has to do with what our ultimate goal is, because, you know, if it's seek first the kingdom of Brent and his
Right.
desires, then that's what I'm going to live like.
Yes.
If it's seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, then that's what I'm going to live like. And I just don't see that in a lot of people. Most people they're here for them. They're here for what they can get out of this place. That's kind of the way they're thinking. And so they're trying to align everything with that goal.
Sure.
And they'll even, it's funny because one of the primary ways people try to decide things is to hear from God.
Right.
And coincidentally, His voice sounds remarkably like theirs. I mean,
Yeah,
it
right.
sounds a whole lot like theirs.
Yeah.
You can hardly tell the difference sometimes.
Yeah, God
Yeah.
agrees with me quite a bit.
Yeah. But I mean, I think we almost have this, we're autonomous. We have our, you know, this is our life.
Sure.
This is, we think the way the world does a lot in this, and our goal is to get, you know, have our best life now. And so if that's your mindset and your goal, then yeah, that's exactly the way you're going to run your life. But if we understand what God's goal is for our lives, that he wants to conform us into the image of His Son for His glory,
Sure.
and we buy into that program, and that becomes our goal, it just changes everything.
It does.
So what should we focus on when it comes to what we can know? Because you said it, like it's not like God is like writing like signs, directives in the clouds. You know what I mean? When we're like coming to a crossroads on a decision, and a lot of people live that way. Like, oh, God's going to do some supernatural thing right now. He's going to show up somehow, right? And he's gonna confirm or deny me making this decision. You know, that's silly. I've never had that in my life. I mean, yes, I've had weird stuff. If hindsight, I can look back and see how God has arranged things, but like he doesn't like do flashing billboards supernaturally typically when I'm trying to figure out what to do. There's only one thing that we really have that is certain, which is the Word of God, right? So we like Psalm 119, verse 105 says, "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." What does that language tell us?
That it's our guide.
That it's our guide.
It will
right?
guide us.
Right. And yet the problem is that it doesn't deal with like every decision that we make or everything that we come across, but there are obviously principles there. And so I would couple the idea that we do have information here that is the will of God for us. May not be on this level, but it's on this level. And he tells us, you know, Jesus tells us, you know, I think you quoted it, Matthew 6, you know, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, as opposed to, in that text, all these other little peripheral things that create anxieties or create worries or simply.
What do we do about that? What do we do about this?
Well,
Yeah,
those
what do I
things
do?
in Matthew 6 aren't necessarily little. Like it's, you know, food and clothing and
Things that he knows we need.
basic
It's
needs,
your
right?
livelihood. It's,
Yeah.
it's all these things.
Yeah,
Chad, those are little things, dude. I haven't eaten in like years, bro.
I mean, they're in the grand scope of things, but
Yeah,
those
you're
are
right.
things that consume our life.
You're right.
Like we spend our whole lives trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to eat well and live well and have clothes and
Right.
you know, cars and things like that.
Yeah, they are big things.
Right.
But his answer there, Jesus, is seek ye first the kingdom of
Right.
God and his righteousness. So he's saying just keep your eyes fixed here instead of here.
Did you just pull out a ye to hear that?
Did I?
Ye
You
first.
did.
Hey,
You
ye
said
did?
seek ye.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, you went King James on us.
I would never say that.
You did.
Easy. You did.
We-
Easy does it.
We can play back the video.
No.
That's all right.
Yeah.
I heard
Let's
that.
not put back the video.
All right.
We have two witnesses.
I was saying it wasn't a bad thing. It's just like, whoa, where did that come from?
So we've kind
Are
of
you,
said.
are you trying to cut him asunder right now?
Yeah, exactly. You're not beseeching me, are you?
I beseech thee.
If you were to wrap this up, what would you tell somebody as far as like, okay, how do I, what's a good way, a disposition for a Christian to walk through their daily life, knowing that we may not have a word from God on a micro level of everything, but like we have a word from God at a macro level. How would you? Because we've had this before. We've had people come to us and they're like, I don't know which job to take right now, right? I don't know which direction to go with what's in front of me right now.
Well, I would say, one, God has given us godly people in our lives to seek
Right.
counsel from.
That's where I was
And
going.
we shouldn't, and maybe it's us in their lives, or maybe it's other people, but
Maybe
to
it's
make-
John Piper.
Yeah, to make decision, probably should, but to make a decision without getting godly counsel, and I find this way too often. Somebody will just say, "Hey, we're moving," and they've not even talked to
Nothing.
I
And
mean,
these are big
Right.
decisions.
Yeah,
you hear
huge
about it
decisions.
after the decisions.
And
been
again,
made.
the cool thing about the bigness of God is that it's not like there used to be a book called Decision Making in the Will of God. It's still probably out there, but it was this idea that God has one
Exactly.
plan for your life,
Right.
and if you screw that up, well, he'll come up with another plan, but you've blown it. It was like, oh my goodness, and that kind of is terrifying to think about because I don't think it's to that degree.
Right.
Well, you didn't marry the lady God wanted you to marry, so here's Plan B, but good luck with that. It's like really terrifying. That wasn't the premise of the book, but he laid that out as one possibility. Sometimes we might take an off ramp, and we might get lost in a neighborhood for a while. But eventually, God's going to get us back on
There you go.
the on ramp.
I was waiting for you to say God's also
Yeah.
going to create an on-ramp.
Yeah,
Wherever
he's
there's an
like-
off-ramp, there's an
Yeah,
on-ramp.
well, but he is going to eventually get us back, to where
Yes.
again, God's ultimate goal will be fulfilled.
Yeah.
But we can do it the easy way, or we can do it the hard way.
Exactly.
Right.
And I think a lot of times because we get so much self-focus, so even when we came to Oregon, it's just by way of example, I didn't want to do it. I started praying. I asked God to change my will to match His will. I asked for things to line up the way that, if this is something you want, I will do this, but, you need to help me out. And I actually even did have a supernatural thing kind of happen. I was listening to a radio program one day, and I didn't even listen to. And the guy came on there and he said, You know, we want it to be spelled out so clearly. Like we want God to just tell us, you need to move to Oregon.
Right.
I mean, he said it on the radio, and I thought, okay, this is weird. I mean, there were those kinds of, because I needed that push. You
Sure.
know? But, and I don't want to say I put fleece out, because I
Right.
didn't really do that. But everything that needed to happen happened so fast, and so it was
Right.
clear that this was something God was doing and not something I was doing, because it was almost it was happening against my will.
Right. You didn't have time to ruin it.
No, and so again, at some point, I just yielded to what he wanted, and it was very clear that that's what was happening. But I think that that's, you know, if you're seeking his kingdom first, and you're seeking his will and his desire for your life, and
So-
not your own.
So to me, that's
Yeah.
the key. Is like
That's
if we're actually seeking His kingdom and His righteousness, it implies that we're being trained in it, that we're being immersed in knowing Him,
Yep.
and I think that changes our outlook. It changes the way that
Sure.
we look at decisions when they come to us. It changes our will and
the
our
way,
desire.
The way we pray, the way we listen to
Exactly.
seek counsel. The,
Right.
You know,
It's almost a trick, dude. It's almost like, you know, he's changing us on the inside in the way that we approach things. It takes care of itself
Yeah.
when we're actually being transformed by righteousness, right? And the way that we even look at decisions and what would be good, or even what we would even consider. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think I might just add to what you said, Brick, because I was going to go the same direction, that, you know, godly counsel. But you know, there can be this dangerous thing where, like, if you ask enough people, somebody's going to eventually tell me what I want to hear,
Sure.
right? and we do that. It's like, okay, well, you said something I don't want to hear, so okay, well, I'll pray about that. And then I'll go, Dave, well, okay, I'll pray about that. And then someone, okay, this is what I want to hear, and so God must be speaking to that person. You know, that's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
And so, just, you know, would encourage people that, you know, to seek godly counsel of people that you know are going to be honest with you and aren't going to pull their punches, people that aren't going to just tell you what you want to hear. Yeah.
Well, I think it's like a number of things where you're getting your family together and say we need to pray about this big decision together, and you're reading the Word with that in mind, and you're seeking counsel with that in mind. For, you know, it's a lot of things. It's not just you're looking for that one thing.
Right.
Like, aha, here now I can get what I
Right.
want. You know, I mean, you're trying to look for. I don't want to say the stars to align, but I mean this idea of like, okay, God is doing something here, and I need to pay attention to it.
Right.
And then there's always just kind of look at the fruit that comes from these decisions we make, because sometimes we get it wrong. And so, you know, if you do move to Texas and you get there and you realize I've made a huge mistake, get back on,
Right.
you know, find the on ramp again and get back into where you're supposed to be. Because
That's why a lot of Christians
Yeah.
aren't running into the fire, though, Brett. It's
Yeah.
because the fruits of it aren't very appealing.
yeah, you're right. You're right.
I know
But
what you're
again,
talking
when you
about.
get there and you just have leanness, I mean,
Yeah,
again,
yeah.
it doesn't always mean
Yeah.
it's a feeling.
Sure.
Right.
But you know, when we got here, it became clear that this was God's will,
Sure.
and I was, and my
Sure.
obedience paid off. You know, it was like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
When you get someplace and you realize, like, well, this is terrible. You know, none of this makes sense.
Yeah.
My family's in disarray.
Right.
You know, we don't have a church to go to.
Right.
None of this. You know, that's where you know, be honest about it.
You're
and
kind of like
get that
Solomon
control.
in Ecclesiastes,
Yeah.
where you try that thing that you think is going to fix you, and then you get there and you're like,
Yeah.
Nope.
there's nothing here.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
yeah, be honest about it.
All right. Final question. Kind of a fun one. Maybe not fun. I don't know.
I have my answer ready to go.
That's a pretty
What?
good setup right there.
Brent's already ready. What should a pastor get
Chad, what am I
paid?
going to say?
Chad. What should a pastor get paid?
Yeah, that's
6 figures.
$1 million.
Annually.
annual.
A
That's
year.
okay.
I looked it up, so I was kind of curious to see what like the range of
The new
pastor
averages?
salaries. And on salary.com, it says between 78,000 and 107,000 and change was which I thought, well, that's good to know. But
And that's like United
it,
States.
it varies because of you know
Sure.
you know demographics and city versus rural and all
Sure.
those kinds of things. But that was the average that pastors make right now. And of course, there's people
Wow.
that skew the averages on both ends of that, obviously.
Mhm.
But I thought that was an
That's interesting.
interesting thing to throw out.
Yeah.
What do you think, Chad?
I've heard metrics in the past that, you know, like it would be based on, you know, like what does a high school principal make? A pastor should make something close to that. Like I've heard that metric come up, and I have no idea what high school principals make, but that's, you know, just heard that. I've heard metrics of, you know, what's the average salary in your congregation, which I don't even know how you figure that out, but maybe there's, you know, demographic data out there. But yeah, so those are just a couple of metrics that I've heard pretty commonly.
So
I
I
think
guess
that's well. I was going to say I think that's a good thing to consider. If a pastor is making substantially more than most of the people that he's pastoring, that's weird.
Right.
I would say.
Totally agree. So
Yeah.
let's just go there then. That was one of the questions is what do you guys think is a good guide? Because the Bible doesn't answer this, right? The Bible makes it clear that the one that labors in the word is worthy of honor, double honor. It's speaking obviously of money, but it never tells us what that looks like or how much that is, what a standard is, where the bar is.
Right.
So in your guys' opinions, what are some good ways to gauge or measure or come to that conclusion of what a pastor should get paid? Let's just talk more metrics.
Yeah, I think godly counsel that we talked about with the previous question, plays into it. That if we as pastors are deciding, what we get paid, it's probably not good. Not a good look. I mean, even if we were to come amongst ourselves to a reasonable amount,
What if we allowed our wives to decide?
right? Just not a good look, and so we bring in godly counsel, to speak into that question, and when it comes time to adjust a pastoral salary, we're seeking out counsel from other people.
Yep.
So it's not necessarily a metric per se, but probably just a wise
Yeah, sure.
thing to do is to have other people speak into it.
Yeah. No, it is. We don't need metrics. They can be just wisdom. That sounds good.
That's good. I was going to say before we get too far away, none of us make
Oh.
the bottom average of the numbers that I threw out there.
Do you want to say that louder?
Well, we don't. None of us make that much. Just for what it's worth. There's an aspect that it's never been about the money.
You mean the average?
The
Yeah.
bottom average was 78. The top
Yeah.
average was 107.
Yeah, none of us are there.
and none of us are at the bottom average.
And we're blessed.
And we're not
happy.
complaining
it's
about
all
that.
good.
Just to give you perspective, we're all underneath that.
Yeah.
I was thinking of like even what churches do use to decide
Mm-hmm.
very often the metrics that they would use, and it's usually stuff like the size of the church, attendance, whether or not a church is growing. Like if it's not growing, then but if it is growing, then those kinds of things, or how effective a pastor is, how important he is to the
Sure.
the cog in the wheel. If he's really an important cog, or if he's really funny, or if he's really whatever it is, then he should get more. And then of course education. If they're bona fide and have the proper amount of education, then they deserve
Yeah.
to be paid well.
Right.
And those are what I think a lot of churches use.
I agree.
Sure, that makes sense.
So the thing in common with all those characteristics you just mentioned is it's kind of a big business type model rather than kind of a Christianly one. Like it's very corporate. The church has become very corporate and adopted very corporate like markers for how they pay people. And even who they pay.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe one of the biggest bummers is that there's just a kind of a perversion. It doesn't mean it's never bad to take something that the world does, whether it's something that's been used in business or something like that, and go, oh, that completely can apply over here. Let's go ahead and use that, right?
Sure.
But it seems like that's become the standard, even to the point of education and stuff. Like that's how we do it in the real world. Is the person most educated is the person who's most qualified, which means it's the person that gets paid the most. And so, yeah, we've kind of just followed along, it seems, with the way that the world does these things, and
Well,
just called it good.
Yeah, and some of those things are actually things to that we should consider.
Totally.
If the church is just plummeting, and attendance
Right.
is dropping, well, maybe it's time to look at this. and
Maybe it's
figure out
time to take homie's jet away.
why. Right. Yeah.
Right?
But I think sometimes a better question.
We don't
is-
have jets, by the way.
So a better question to think, in regards to, is like how much does a pastor need to make? To me,
That
is
is a better
Is
question.
a better
Yeah.
question, and like how much can he make? But I
Yeah.
mean, what are his needs right now?
Yeah.
That seems like a really reasonable question to
Sure.
ask.
Yeah.
And I think we've done that. That's kind of where we've arrived at what we've arrived at over the years.
Sure.
Because we started out as with no pay.
Right.
We were working regular jobs, and we didn't have that. And you
Chad is still working a regular
still
job.
bivocational. And as the church grew and as the need arose, then we started to adjust those things.
Sure.
But it really, the factor was what are your bills and what do we need? What do you need to be able to make so that you can do this full time? That had to be answered. And
Well, we do
figured
need
out.
to be able to
Right.
live in the area that we're ministering in.
Right.
And so
Right.
you are taking into account, obviously, cost of living. And that's where it can vary. You can have Tim Keller that lives in Manhattan, right?
Right.
Which is pretty unique. And then some dude that lives, in Paisley, Oregon, that's a, population of 42 people. You know what I mean? And it's like, yeah, their salary probably shouldn't look the same just
Right.
because of cost of living and
Right.
what's needed in order to live in those areas. And so obviously that's something that's wise and that makes sense to look
But
at.
it should be set up in a way that the pastor doesn't have to go out and find 3 jobs
Agreed.
in order to, if he's full time. I mean, right now you've got 2 jobs effectively. So I know, but right now you don't want to make it to where maybe his wife, you know, especially if they've got young kids, has to go out and find a job, or that, you know, so
Totally.
make it doable to where he can do this effectively
Yeah.
if it's possible.
I
But
love-
again,
yeah.
but don't get crazy with it.
Don't get
Right.
crazy. So I love what John Piper's, he has a quote that says, churches should not want to keep their pastors poor or make them rich.
Yeah.
And it's just like, now obviously there's a lot of room in between those bookends, but like that's a pretty good rule. Like you shouldn't want to have that, your pastor and their family poor, but you also don't want to give them so much that it becomes their demise
Right.
or the church's
Yeah.
demise. So it should be reasonable. I like what you said earlier about even the demographic, I think should come into play.
Right.
Determining that who's primarily the demographic that makes up your church that you're ministering to. What do their lives look like? What kind of jobs do they have? What kind of, because I would always want to be like right where they are.
Right.
I wouldn't want to be
Right.
really above where they are.
The funny thing is that that's what a lot of people, when they pick a place to plant a church,
Yes.
they plant with that in
Totally
mind.
do.
Like, let's go
Yeah.
up to the top of the hill
Totally.
where everybody's making
Right.
300,000. And I don't think it's so that they can get that salary so much, but
Right.
it's like, we got a fighting chance to be a successful church.
Well, you know, there's
Money.
gonna,
Sure.
you know, that demographic's going to have deeper pockets,
Right.
right? And so like it all follows
Yeah.
itself.
Right.
We
I
didn't pick
think
that
the other
up.
the other side of this coin that we're talking about too is from the perspective of the pastor. Like I know that you guys are guys like you can't not do this, and you know if there was an adjustment in your guys' salary that were to happen tomorrow, you know you guys would be full force still doing everything.
We'd
that
still
you
be
can
sitting
do,
at this table looking
to
stupid.
pastor the church, no matter what the pay is. And so I think that's just worth noting as well, is that there's got to be this mentality of the person who's called to the ministry, that like you're gonna figure it out how to do it no matter what.
Sure. So our context here is a little different because we don't have a senior pastor or a lead pastor. Literally, it's a co-equal plurality. I know you went on before me, but that wasn't because again, like Brent's like the head guy. It's you went on because of your job situation. You couldn't go part-time. I was able to adjust. My job was a little more seasonal, so I was able to hold out longer. And so you went on first. I followed behind a couple years later. We both annually get the same thing.
Right.
Chad is just as important and just as much of a pastor here as us, but he's still having to work a job, and that's because he's come in later. And so there's a context and kind of a way that it has to develop, where we haven't been able to just bring you there, but we're working on ways to bring you to where we're at.
Well, and part of
And
that depends on the need of the church and what the church can afford.
For sure.
That has to
Right.
also has to
Well,
be
that's-
factored
right.
in. And right now, the church has shrunk in some ways. So over the last couple of years, it's rebounding well, and things are. I'm not worried about that. But as the church grows and the need grows, that will become possible.
Sure, the
And,
dynamic will change.
and the Lord has been good about that. It's been kind of cool to see the way it's worked. My job, my company did not want me to go part time.
Yeah.
But I was able to do that for a number of years, and then I was able to find a different job where I could do that for a while that still met the needs, and then eventually, it worked out this way. So the way the Lord has worked this out over the years and the way that it's come to be has been cool. And I
Yeah.
know that if we have to go the other direction again for a time, and we'll do that. We'll figure it out.
Sure.
The pay isn't really, it does free us up, which I really do appreciate, but the pay's never been, a thing
Right.
for us.
That's part of what I love, obviously, about both of you, is that it seriously is not like the thing. And even guys that I do love, guys that are godly and I look up to and I respect, in other churches, whether they're celebrity, well-known guys or not, it seems like there's, unfortunately, always this lens that we look through to money. What does this do financially for me? What does this do financially for the church? And it seems to always be this thing, and I love that has no place here at this church. We have never ever made decisions or functioned or operated with money first, and it's just like
It clouds so much of what you have to do. If we become
Right.
beholden to money or to and that becomes this thing we have to do,
Yes.
then you begin to market the church. You need
Right.
to keep people there at all costs. You need to make sure. I mean, it becomes this machine that needs to be. I don't know. I'm glad we don't have that.
I am
We
too.
operate very simply. We don't have an office. We don't have secretaries. We
No.
don't have any of this stuff. This big machine to feed. We don't have a lot of staff people. It's very lean and mean. And if it all, goes away tomorrow, we'll figure it out. The Lord will figure it out for us. He'll provide it. And it is
Yeah.
weird sometimes because the job I had before, I had good health insurance. I had a good retirement plan. I don't have those things
okay,
anymore.
this is a different subject we're getting into.
Well, it is part of the I know, but it is like even that kind of stuff. We at some point have to trust that the Lord's going to take care of that.
Yeah.
And,
Right.
It's actually kind of on our list to consider some of these things because we
It is.
found that we're not getting younger. We're actually getting older.
Wait,
And so
what?
we're having
At a
to
rapid
start to
pace.
think about these things, and
We can't slow
so
down.
we have had talks a little bit lately about retirement or even insurance.
Well, and the cool thing is that even was spearheaded by somebody outside of this group that
That is
said,
nice.
you know,
Yeah.
we need to look into this for you guys. I can't state enough how generous the church has
our
been.
people are so
Absolutely.
rad, so awesome.
It's been amazing to see. Even last year, in a lean year, when attendance has been declining in some churches and finances have been declining in some churches, we had our best year ever. It's just nuts.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
you know, at the end of the day, God's taking care of this church well, and He's taking care of us well, and I believe that He's going to continue.
Right.
For sure.
It seems like there's a lot of churches out there that the mentality, whether intentional or not, the mentality is like let's get as much as we can for as little as we can, out of our pastor.
Yeah.
And definitely that's not our church.
Right.
At all. It seems like there's a genuine interest on the part of the people to make sure that the pastors are taken care of, and we see that, we notice it, and appreciate it very
Yeah.
much.
Yep. Cool. Anything you guys want to add to that?
That's all I have to say about
There's
it.
nothing to add to that.
That wasn't as weird as I thought it was. gonna
No,
be.
dude.
No,
I mean,
was
it is a
good.
weird question, but at the same time, it's informational. And
Right.
Kind of fun to talk about. And
I
you
will
know.
just say that we've been talking a lot about our existing bylaws. We kind of all tuned into that podcast, The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, and we've been kind of thinking about trying to find ways to build more accountability into, we're not a denomination, and so we don't have that oversight. We definitely have accountability in our lives, but even finding a way to rethink some of that. Just maybe ask you guys to pray as we figure this out, because we don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we're tempted to do something or even have the ability to do something that would be wrong in this
Sure.
regard.
Right.
And we're pretty serious about it right now. It's
Yeah.
kind of like there's some disgusting things
We
that
wanna have
happen
safeguards.
in churches, and we don't want to even have an option for those things. So we're kind of rethinking some of that. Well, there'll be more to come on that, but
Right.
as we pray through this and look at it, we just appreciate you guys praying along with us.
Well, praise God. This right here, in and of itself, takes care of a lot of that.
It
Like
does.
in the churches that we've seen that happen.
Yep.
But yeah, even having people outside of this, because then this could look like one thing, just to make sure that we always got someone looking over our shoulder and keeping
Right.
us honest. Which actually we've always had that,
Yep.
but we are trying to find a way to articulate that further for everybody else in,
Yep.
in the bylaws. So
Yeah, just more safeguards and more accountability in a way that protects us and protects the church.
yeah,
Yep.
cool.
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to pray. Thanks for joining us today, guys. Lord, thank you for just the time that we have together. Thank you for bringing Chad back to us. Thank you that him and Jill had an awesome time down there, that it was relaxing and adventurous and exciting, and that they were just able to go and do it. Thanks for allowing that, Lord, and thank you for the team that you've given us here. Thank you that we can prop each other up, that we can push each other forward, and just challenge and encourage each other in the faith. I pray that our people would be challenged and encouraged as well by the things we talk about. I pray that they would be informational, that they would be interesting, but most of all, that they would be things that are constantly turning their mind and their lives towards you and what you want. And so we commit them to you and this church to you. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 See you next week.
See you next week.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.